All right, guys. So today I have a successful sync licensing producer composer that reached out to me recently to let me know that he's doing this. He's one of what I'm going to call the 3 to 5% that are consistently sticking with this industry and turning into his full-time focus. He actually got started in 2014, and he let me know by 2018 he was able to let go of all of his other work and gigs and really just focus most of his time on TV, film, sync licensing through production music, through the libraries, and the approach that essentially I did as well in my career. So he just reached out to say hello and that he was appreciating the videos and the content we've been putting out. So I invited him. I said, Steven, you got to come on my channel because you're the exact kind of producer and composer that most of my audience wants to hear from because I got started so long ago. I feel like a dinosaur at this point. So it's really helpful and encouraging to hear from people who have started more recently than me but are seeing great results because of course the tendency is, well, the good old days are behind us, those massive sync fees are gone, so there's no more opportunity in this industry. And hopefully with these success stories and hearing directly from people like Steven, you will see really quickly that that is not true, that there are still amazing opportunities in this business. As I've been promising, we're going to showcase on this channel. Before I bring him on camera here, I'm going to show you guys some of his more notable placements. Call of Duty, quite a few trailers and placements there. He did the La Brea Season 2 trailer as well. He's also done some major motion picture ad campaigns and trailers. So the Tomorrow War, Space Jam, Spiral, Godzilla. So obviously huge ones. And he's done tons and tons of reality TV, which is definitely what kind of my bread and butter as well. So Iron Chef, Tough as Nails, Hot Wheels Ultimate Challenge, Running Wild, Catfish, The Prophet. We actually share quite a few of these titles, which is kind of cool, and many more. So this is Steven McDonald. I'm going to bring him on camera now. Steven, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate your time today. And why don't you go ahead and let us know, how did you figure out and discover what sync licensing was? Because 2014 kind of were the dark days, the dark ages. This is actually before I had a YouTube channel. So how did you stumble into this industry?
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about this kind of stuff with people. So I think I would say like sync licensing kind of fell onto me more so. I never sought it out. I never really thought I would be doing anything with music for a living. Just like a little background, I was in band in high school. I played clarinet, and I started wanting to write. I started wanting to write my own like concert band music, and that was what I started doing like around my senior year of high school. And I met a young composer who came to guest conduct at our school. He showed me virtual instruments and DAWs, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually kind of cool. I can, kind of create my own product here without having to get recordings. Sort of just, I'm a big video game fan. I was just writing music for fun, like Halo inspired music, putting it on YouTube and stuff like that. And I went ahead and got a job that I was like, well, I can do this. This is my, like, I don't completely hate this. Well, I didn't yet. Uh, but I sort of just working a job and writing music for fun. At some point I got contacted by someone who was telling me he works for a music library, does reality TV. The deal was like they were mostly pop and hip hop guys. And they were starting to get deals with, Discovery Channel, History Channel, some of the more like cinematic music, some of the more cinematic shows, the shows that needed more orchestral stuff and less poppy radio stuff. And he was needing help filling out that side of their library. So I I was skeptical. I was like, well, this seems crazy, just some guy from Hollywood reaching out to my random YouTube channel, but sure, I'll try it. And I started doing it, and that kind of got me like whipped into shape really fast. That guy, I work with him more than anyone else in that company. I still, to this day, they're the ones I write the most music for. Much respect to that guy. He kind of mentored me and showed me the way of the business. And I hit the ground running right away and was like, he asked if I thought I could write 5 tracks a week, and I had a full-time job, and I was like, okay, sure. And I did it. And I just kind of got efficient and fast. And, over the years, I learned more about the industry and started making my own connections and stuff. And that's how I branched out to working with a lot of different libraries. So it was, that was like late 2014 whenever he contacted me. And then I guess it was the first quarter, January 2016, I got my first royalty check, and, it's like $200. I know it's more than a lot of people's firsts, but for me, it was like, this is what I've been doing. This is what I've been working 2 jobs for the past year. But I stuck with it because I was aware, my friend there, my mentor, told me that it's slow. And so I actually ended up quitting that job and taking a part-time job I'm married. My wife was working at the time, so I had a bit more of a cushion to take that risk. So I moved to a part-time job, did that for 2 more years, and then beginning of 2018, I was able to drop that job and rely fully on mostly royalties, occasionally some upfront sync fees and consideration fees, advances, stuff like that.
That's
So that was
amazing,
kind
man.
of the the journey there. And I know like that was pretty fast. And I will preface this with like, well, I guess I'm not prefacing. I'm postfacing this. So I will footnote that was fast. And I know it does not happen that fast for most people. And I credit that largely to luck and the fact that I lucked my way into a good library that was busy and needed me, rather than like trying to insert myself into, other libraries that already have their rosters and, have their needs covered. So that was, you know, getting into that situation and hitting the ground running with writing a ton of music really fast over those 3 years. That's how I got there. That's how I built up, because I was probably closing in on 1,000 tracks by the time I went full time, out there, published. So, you know,
And
it's
that's
not
true, but I also want to
easy.
point out, yeah, I want to point out one thing as well, though. It's absolutely true. You were just putting your music on YouTube. Somebody randomly stumbled across it, reached out to you, wanted to partner with you, which is awesome and amazing. But the fact that you got a $200 royalty check after a couple of years and still kept with it is, I believe, one of the major reasons why you're at where you're at right now. Because what most people do, and it's totally understandable, is they see that $200 and they go, all right, the hell with this. I'm done. I've committed so much to this. I've made so much music. I've had so much faith in this company and in this industry and in myself to do this. $200 after 2 years. Why would anybody in their right mind keep doing this? Most producers and composers run away from it, go away. And then it's like a year or two later, then the royalties maybe start kicking in a little bit more aggressively and they come running back to try to catch up. So the fact that it sounds like you didn't do that, you just consistently put your head down and focused on moving forward, it seems to be, for me, the biggest element for what created your success. And this is exactly what I'm going to be highlighting on my channel here very in the near future, which is about outcome independence, where the $200 royalty check obviously felt like a kick in the gut, as I understand it did. Mine was 14 cents, so you can imagine how much more of a kick I felt. So how do you think psychologically you got through that? Like, why did you keep going in an industry that was paying you pretty little in the first couple of years?
So there's kind of like a practical sense and the philosophical sense. I'll start with the practical. So, by that point, I had written I probably was around 300 tracks in, if like assuming I'm consistently doing 5 tracks a week for a little over a year, so I knew that I had a lot of music out there and I knew it would take time. And that first check, like, I was pissed when I saw the deposit. Then when I got the statement in later, I was like, okay, well, I think there was actually one single track on that statement that had been placed by then. And I gotten lucky. It was on a network show first. So it was like, $225 from one placement. And I was like, okay, I'm annoyed right now, but that was one and I've written 300. So like things are going to catch up. And if I stop now, then in a year there will be another big dip. So just understanding, that understanding of how the royalty system works, how slow it is, and how it's all just a big snowball effect. Um, I had a good understanding of that going in, so I knew like I expected it to be slow. And then philosophically, this is something I share with you. I've heard a lot in your stories that you were working somewhere you hated, working for bosses you didn't respect. I was at that point also with my day job where that's why I was so ready to immediately quit it. Even though I got a $200 check, I was like, I'm going to quit and do something part-time in the meantime. I had reached that point with my job where, they had brought on someone like a friend of a friend or something that was going to turn the company around and really whip them into shape. And he was just the worst, just the worst. I hated that guy. He was just an awful boss. So I was ready to get out of there. And I was like, well, if I just quit now, like I'm going to have to keep doing things like this. It doesn't matter, So, and I was lucky enough to find like a part-time job that was actually nice. I actually kind of liked that job. Gave me a little bit of hope. And, and also like I said, having my wife working at the time was, it did provide me that cushion, and she is extremely supportive. She was like, oh yeah, you should quit. Like, you hate your job, you're doing something else, you should quit. Like, I have a job, we'll be okay. We also live in a pretty low cost of living area, out here in Oklahoma. So, we had already, at that point, we had already bought a house, like our starter home, just off of our 2 full-time job salaries. And so we were like feeling, we're in a pretty decent financial place. we can take a little risk. So that got me to power through. And also at some point while I was at the part-time job for those 2 years, my daughter was born. So there was another big kick of like, you better make this work because I knew there was nothing else. There was no other job I was going to find that would provide me like the flexibility to be at home with her and still work. And that was a big thing. I want to be a present dad. And so I knew that doing library music, production music, sync or whatever would be one of the few options where I could be at home all the time. And that's just the life I wanted.
It's beautiful, man. I love that. And two things I noticed and I heard from your response. One, desperation, right? Same thing that I had, which was I'll do anything to get out of that work world, to get out of that day job. I was in the startup culture, and same as you, work for bosses definitely didn't respect and didn't believe in the company mission at all, even. And so I had this just commitment to myself of, yeah, I'm going to just make this work. I just had this dead set. It's, there is no failure here. I'm just going to march forward with it. I see some progress. Something's working, $200 coming through. Something in the pipeline is working here where I'm making music and it's ending up on TV, even if it's not a lot in the beginning. Something's working. Let's just trudge through that. Secondly, support of your wife. So having family members that you are relying on and supplying and providing for, having them on board with your vision and your goals and what's important to you is so crucial. You cannot fight two different battles at once where you're fighting against how hard this business is anyways. And on top of that, you're trying to have to consistently convince, your loved ones or the people that you live with, no, this is really good. Trust me, please believe in me. It's just too hard if you have to fight both of those battles at once. So if you have support from the people around you that are saying, absolutely, go for it. I'll help support you. I'll give you the time, the space, the whatever you need to get this done. Let's do it together. It's just crucial. It's absolutely important. And
Yes.
I want to also talk about, you had talked about how you were asked to do 5 tracks a week, which probably in the beginning seemed like that's impossible. Nobody can do 5 tracks a week. And I know that you do many different styles of music. And by the way, guys, go in, click on the link in the description box after this interview and check out Steven's music. He is an amazing, very talented producer. Trailer music, orchestral music, pop music. He does so many different styles of music. You're really just a multi-genre talented guy. So how did you in the very beginning approach creating 5 tracks a week? What were some of your stumbling blocks and how did you figure out how to increase your efficiency? What tips or tricks can you give us for how you sped up your production process?
I, I'm always I think there's just like something in my brain. I really, really thrive on getting something done quickly, like as early in the day as possible, and then relax and then like having fun. So like I'll tell people that like I have Cubase open for like the first 2 or 3 hours of my day, and then I have Steam open the rest of the day. Just it's just like when I was working the full-time job too, I was worried at first, like, oh, I'm gonna become one of those workaholics that I'm gonna alienate my wife and ruin my life over this. But I tend to worry about a lot of things that don't happen, and I it ended up being fine. I would use weekends to catch up when I didn't feel like I was staying on top of it. But I think the biggest thing was I started getting up 6 a.m. or so and trying to get like 2 hours of work time before I started. My job was at 9 and I lived across the street from it. So I didn't really have much commute. So I was like, okay, if I can, if I can wake up at 6, have something done by 8, and then I can like then I can shower, have some breakfast, whatever, go to work. And then it's like it never happened, you know what I mean? Like then I come home from work and I just have my day. And I wasn't always able to get like a full track done in that time. It would depend on the genre and stuff like that. But even just, I feel way better if I have like a track, like a kind of a skeleton laid out, that makes it much easier to come back later and finish it up. And that's what weekends would be finishing stuff up, or, and I might take like an hour or so after work if I wanted to. But, my wife and I, we're pretty simple people. We don't, we're not like going out clubbing or anything during the, at night. We stay home, watch TV shows they're into, play with their dog, But I think that the mornings thing, and that is something that is carried on throughout. And when my daughter was born, I ended up, there was about a year where I considered myself kind of stay-at-home dad while my wife was working a full-time job. So like that first year where after I quit all the jobs, I was home taking care of Jade most of the time, Jade, my daughter, and she was a baby. And I always say that like when she would nap, I would kick it into high gear. It's like she's asleep you understand this, like she's asleep, like on a crazy, crazy good day, that's like 3 hours. Not, how babies are. It's like sometimes it's 30 minutes. But when she'd go to sleep, I'd be like, okay, can I write a track while she's asleep? And then when she's awake, I will feel great and I can give her my full attention. Like, I've done my work and I can be present. So those were like, I think two of the major things was just like getting up earlier and uh, learning, just learning efficiency. I'm impatient naturally, so I think that helps me to get things done faster. And I will admit, I've sometimes the quality suffers when I do that. That's been part of my journey is balancing my impatience and my need for efficiency over the needs of the client and making sure I set the bar high enough for myself. But yeah, I guess that's my answer. Baby naps, getting up early, and just I guess I don't labor over creative decisions as much as some people do, I think, because I know music theory well enough to know like I have good starting points for what mood if something needs to be. And I'm constantly reminding myself, is this hitting the brief? That's the number one thing. Whether or not it's like perfect or artistically creative is secondary. So I think putting that behind me is another reason. Focusing
Totally,
on
man.
hitting the
Yeah,
brief.
it's funny. You're triggering me back to those days of, my firstborn. Yeah, and sometimes she would nap for 15 minutes. That was like all I could get. And I remember running into my home studio. I was working in my home studio at the time, and okay, I can get something done. And then hearing her crying, it's just like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. 15 minutes. So yeah, you just totally bring me back to those days. So fun times. But I also want to ask you too about your approach for making your tracks licensable. I definitely noticed that in your answer as well, that you are sort of staying out of this. Is this perfect? Is this the best thing I've ever done? Kind of forgetting about all that nonsense that honestly is procrastination because it
Mhm.
prevents us from hitting bounce. But you just always go, is this good enough? Like, is this going to work for the brief? Is this kind of what they're looking for? Is my interpretation of what they want or what the library owner was looking for hitting that? Absolutely. That is a winning frame that you can always win at because, yeah, is it ever going to be perfect? Is every track you make going to be your favorite? No, of course not. It's like realistically, you'll have a couple of handful of ones, but there'll be a lot that you're like, well, I got that one done. And that's all I can really say about it. I got it done. It was accepted, right?
It is
So
indeed music.
there you go. Yeah. But it got across the finish line. So I want to ask you too with your process, do you use or have you ever used reference tracks, listening to other music to get inspired? Do you have templates or you have pre-loaded sounds that you usually go to? Your mixing and mastering process, do you usually have the same chain on your master bus that you use, similar settings? Any shortcuts that you're using to kind of just get through the creative process within like 2 or 3 hours, as you said?
Okay, so I mostly work from briefs, like the reality TV. In the reality TV world, I'm sure you're aware. I get briefs, I get reference tracks. So I'm always listening to reference tracks, and I think it's been a skill I've developed over the years to being able to interpret what the client likes about the reference tracks. That so like that is a good part of my process of just like so quickly listening through, being like, okay, all these tracks have this in common. I have a starting point. Let's go. And when I actually like get in there and open up Cubase. So I do have a template. I just have, but usually I just stick with one template. I call it my stemplate. The main purpose of the template is that my instruments are grouped together and routed to their stems, so I can do one click export all the stems at once. But I also, I have friends who have like I have 1,000 tracks in my template, and I'm like, that sounds terrible to load and impossible to look at. But okay, mine I think I have like 100 tracks, and it's just like my most often used sounds. Like over the years I've refined like okay, for my orchestral stuff. I know I'm going to use Cinematic Studio strings and like Pacific strings a lot, so I have those loaded up ready to go. My brass, I go down the line. I have for like synths, it's like I might just have like 3 or 4 blank Omnisphere instances because I know I'm going to use Omnisphere a lot, and I just go down the line like that. It's not an all comprehensive template, where some people think their template needs to be all of their instruments they own. For me, it's just the stuff that I'm 90% sure I'm going to use, and I don't want to go looking for it. So that's my approach to templates. And I don't know, as far as I don't know if there's really any shortcuts
What about
other
mixing
than
and
just
mastering? Do you use similar?
so,
Yeah.
so my mastering chain is the same pretty much on every track. There might be little differences, and depending on the genre. Like if I'm doing something that's more pop, hip hoppy, the compression might be heavier overall. But when if I'm doing something more orchestral, I'll let it breathe a little more, be a little more natural. But yeah, I do have largely the same mastering chain. And one of the things I do in my stems is I do pre-mix a little bit on my template, Like I know what reverb I like on my strings bus. I know I'm gonna have, I know I'm gonna roll off certain frequencies, and so I'll do that stuff ahead of time. And um, yeah, I'm not the most thorough mixer for sure, but like I said, I'm also aware that these tracks are going to be, they might be mono buried under dialogue, and no one's going to notice them for the most part. I have to, like, I always have to give this disclaimer when I'm talking about the process. I don't want people to be like, oh, that Steven guy he says you should just go fast and not worry about quality. No, that's not what I don't say that. I like, I try to make every track good and something I'm proud of, but I'm just aware that I'm writing for a brief. I'm not writing for me. I'm writing for a client, and it's more important to make sure that my track has the edit points, has the right tone, has the right ending than it is to, go all out and craft a masterpiece. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think everybody's aware of that too, that there are essentially a couple of different approaches in this industry. One is yours. Anthony Crawford also was one of our recent success stories we were highlighting on the channel, and myself as well. We played more of the quantity game, which is that, 3 to 5 tracks a week. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. It's a numbers game essentially. And that is a completely different approach than I'm going to spend this whole week getting one trailer track queue done, right? So you have different considerations, you have different time constraints for that kind of a thing, and different things you need to evaluate and balance in terms of what do I need to spend some extra time on, what can I just sort of get done good enough and move on so that I can just continue on with this progress. So absolutely, you always shoot for the highest quality you can, but of course, if you're playing the numbers game, it's just a different level of consideration of like, how much should I be struggling with the quality of any one of these elements versus getting it done, hitting the brief. Is it licensable? Is it marketable? Are they saying thumbs up to it generally for all the things that I'm doing? Okay. And you get a sense for that after a while. If you go like, okay, I pulled my hair out over this one and they said yes. This one, I didn't pull my hair out over and they also said yes, and that one got placed. So you start to realize you're like, okay, so maybe I'm overthinking this sometimes, and sometimes I really just need to think about like just getting the overall vibe and the emotional appeal to it. And like you said, not worrying about if every particular frequency is perfectly balanced or if there's some harshness here or there or things aren't perfectly put together. Because like you said, most of the time for these background instrumentals, especially with reality shows, most of it's ducked underneath, and most of that can't even be heard anyways in the final part of it.
And can I say one more thing to that point? Like I have friends that are very much the opposite of me, and I have extreme respect. So like, I don't say like Mark Petrie or Blakis, to name some, that like just in the orchestral space that will spend weeks on one track, and it works for them. Like the industry has opened up to them in a way that it never has for me. And I've tried that before, and I think I get stressed, overthink, and I just get annoyed, and I'm just like, oh, I can't do this. And I think an important part of moving forward into sync is being aware of your own mindset, how your brain works. And I've realized, like I said, my brain loves getting something done early and like efficiently and fast, and then relaxing the rest of the day or whatever. That's what I thrive on. So I've just come to accept, okay, this reality TV world where you got to be fast, I'm good at that. That's what works for me. But like, whenever I don't know if say Mark or Blake would want to do what I do, and I necessarily don't want to do what they do. So I don't want to push that there's one way you should do it for sure. I want to push that you need to do it the way that works for you, the way that you can sustain. So
absolutely, yeah. Point very well taken. So right now, are you currently still just working with this single library that you got started with? Do you have a couple of different clients that you work with? What's your workload on a week-to-week basis kind of look like?
So I have that first library that took me on, I still work with them, I would say pretty much weekly. They have a brief for me to work on, I'd say like 90% of weeks. I just going by weeks. I have a couple others that I work with as well that'll send me briefs less, but they're still great. And whenever I'm not doing reality TV working on briefs, I'll just kind of start my own albums for fun. Just like last week was a very not busy week, and I was like, my daughter's at camp, like she's 7 years old now, so she can go to school and camp and stuff. So I have like a full day of it. So I like, well, start an album, and and I've been working on an album. And with those, depending on what the genre is, I'll send it to either like someone I've worked with before, which I've worked with a lot of different libraries. Sometimes I enjoy just shopping them around, pitching, the excitement of waiting for emails back, or looking at your real crafter and seeing that none of them even opened the link. That's always fun. But yeah, so week to week, day to day, it's usually like if I have a reality TV brief to do, I'll get one of those done, knock one out as early as I can in the day, and then goof around with my friends in video games, or if depending on how motivated I'm feeling or how empty my day is, maybe start something on my own motivation.
Okay, and then when do these trailer opportunities come in? From that same library or different
Okay.
clients?
Oh, yeah. So the trailer thing, I got really into trailers probably in like 2019, 20 through like 2021, maybe 2022. And I I have like I had a lot of success there, a decent amount of success, more, enough to be like, well, that was worth it. But I came to realize I don't really like doing it anymore. So I haven't really written any new trailer music since, I don't know. I think I did like a half album last year or something like that. So I have a decent catalog of trailer music with one company that has ended up like those will still bring me syncs 2 or 3 times a year. Just a catalog stuff. I was doing customs and everything. I hate it. It feels like a young man's game, to so to speak. Where I don't want to be I don't want to be taking calls about revisions at 9 p.m. and doing that kind of stuff, and then ending up not getting getting zero money out of it. I think trailer music just burned out for me because the style was too similar, too repetitive, too much of the same. Everything's at 11 all the time. And I just found myself more comfortable sticking with TV music, getting that variety and the more passive, slow income as opposed to the like lottery ticket kind of like, oh, I got a huge check and then not getting one for another 2 years. So trailer music was just, that was a phase that I did. And I learned a lot from it. And I'd still take what I learned from doing trailer music into TV, but I toned things down for TV a bit. So
Totally. Fair enough.
yeah.
I'm also hearing this too, is that you really have gotten to know yourself very well in this process. That, this is a big industry and there are many different ways to fit into it. And we don't all fit into it the same way based on our personality and our skill sets and our lifestyles and also our family obligations. So I think that's really cool that you figured out a way, and you've really you sound like you're very clear on what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what's going to impede your family life too much, what you're willing to give of yourself to this industry. And that's really great that you found these kind of cool opportunities for yourself. I know everybody watching is definitely going to find that really valuable. And speaking of everybody watching, many people watching this video are either in the beginning stages, maybe they're not even accepted yet by a library. Some of them have been with a library for a couple of years, and they're in that, I'm not seeing many results, or I'm not getting any royalties, or my royalties are very, very small. Should I keep doing this? Should I not? What advice, insights could you share with anybody, even looking back to yourself in those first couple of years? What sort of words of encouragement or insight would you think would have made a big difference for you in those first couple of years of uncertainty?
All right. I'll give some encouragement and some like discouragement disguised as encouragement. I mean, we both know it's
We keep it
important
real on this channel, so be honest, man.
Yeah. So I think one of the first, I've had a lot of composers, I'm pretty big on community and meeting other composers, and I've had a lot asking me for advice. And I think one of the first things I always tell them is it sucks, but get a job. Like I said, we talked about how desperation was a factor of like, we hated our jobs, wanted to get out. But I think it's good to be realistic and be like, there is a very good chance that this never works out full time for a lot of people, for most people even. And I think it's good to set yourself up in a situation where you are okay with how things are before diving into this. And because I think it's better off if you treat it as it is, it's your side hustle, your money generating hobby for a while. And if things do build up, and they should over time, if things do build up to an extent that you feel comfortable quitting and going all in, then do that. And so that's the first thing. I'd say get yourself set up financially where you don't have to depend on it quite yet, because that's a good way to destroy your life, to be quite honest. And it does. Some people will tell you stories about how they just dropped everything and pursued music and it worked out, and that's great, and I'm glad that can happen. But I think, to be realistic, set yourself up for success regardless, and find joy in things other than becoming a full-time composer, because it's going to be hard, and you might never find joy if that's the thing you're so focused on. So that's, from a philosophical standpoint, that's what I would say. Other thing would be, in a more practical sense, like we just talked about, get to know yourself, know your limits, know your boundaries, know what you're good at, and try to focus on those things. And that doesn't mean you don't need to grow. You should try to grow, but try and one of the big things I've done is narrowed, like you were talking about my genres. I have narrowed down to where I don't really do much pop radio hip hoppy stuff anymore because I just wasn't as good at it as the people I was competing with. And I came to realize that I was like, okay, I'm good at cinematic music. I mostly focus on that now. So, find your lane, um, find your joy in other things. And I think most importantly, maybe second most importantly, don't be a pain to work with because like we've talked about before, this industry is very relationship heavy. I like working with people I like, and I like to think that the people that work with me do so because they like working with me. Like we're friends. We ask about, we'll talk about our families and stuff, shoot the breeze, get to business, get it done. And being reliable is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than I expected, I guess. I guess in my head, it's just like common sense to be reliable. But then as I've learned and from seeing other people, sometimes I'm like, oh, I guess communication just like doesn't come that naturally to some people. And if it doesn't, work on that.
Totally. And consistency
Yeah,
is very
yeah.
rare too. There's a lot of flakes in the world, not just in the music business, not just among musicians and producers and composers, but a lot of people are looking for the big paycheck in the next couple of weeks or months. And so they get excited about something like sync licensing, jumping in, but then you're right, not being reliable, not communicating quickly, not being available, and not delivering on time or ahead of schedule. And so you're absolutely right. It's really not usually talent that I find across the board, even though you are very talented and everybody that I've featured on this channel has an amazing talent. But we are not the best in the world, and that's why we got to where we got to in this industry. No, we were definitely delivering something good enough. And most importantly, I believe, just like as you've been pointing out, it's showing up. We're just there. And like you said, we're easy to work with and we're fun to work with. And we are very appreciative of every opportunity we get, whether or not we get the gig or we don't get the gig. We always say, thank you for sending me this opportunity. I think it's just so great. I'm so grateful that I even get to be a part of this really cool initiative for whatever it is. So people notice these little things. People want to work with cool people. People want to work with grateful people. And of course, professional people. So I think you've kind of summarized the entire game here, Stephen. Thank you so much, man, for being on the channel, for sharing your story, for coming on here. I definitely am going to try to get you back on from time to time because I think people like you have so much value to offer people who are getting involved and thinking about taking sync licensing seriously. And I really do appreciate your honesty there about like the odds are stacked up against everybody. It's absolutely true. It's why I've been saying 3 to 5% is maybe even a very liberal estimate of the people that really can succeed. I'm thinking these days I'm going to be reducing that to 1 or 2% because I've coached hundreds, probably thousands of producers at this point, and it's a small number of you guys that do move on to that next level of seeing some great results. So it's still possible, but of course, very, very, very difficult. And yeah, a lot of it is out of our control. We don't get to control whether or not libraries accept us, whether we get placements, how much those royalties are going to be, whether cue sheets get turned in. I mean, the list of things that we don't get to control are endless. So I think, Stephen, I could summarize it best, I think, by saying you have really just focused on what you can control, which is how you respond, how you interact, and what you do with your hands on your keyboard in your DAW. So I think if you guys can take that from this interview, you'll be in the best possible shape that you can. So thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate your time today, man.
Thanks for having me on.